Welcome to the virtual happy half hour. We'll be starting in about 1 minute. Welcome everyone. We'll be getting started in about 30 seconds, just waiting for folks to log in. We're excited to talk to you about real lead generation in a virtual world. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our weekly virtual happy half hour. I'm Michelle Richardson, Vice President of the Sales Performance Research Center at the Brooks Group. I'm joined once again by Russ, our Director of Facilitation and Coaching Excellence. And our virtual happy half hour is a weekly series designed to help all of us navigate this current environment together. And today's topic is real lead generation in a virtual world. It's certainly a hot topic. I know we're hearing a lot about it from our clients. And I think the need for this topic certainly bears out in the data that we've been sharing over the last several weeks relative to sales results and pipeline. This is designed to give you a 30-minute dive into lead generation. If you're interested in digging into this topic a little bit more, we will be having a workshop dedicated to lead generation. That'll be next week, May 7th. And if you'd like more information on that, Russ will be talking about it as we go through today. And you can also join our mailing list at webinar@thebrooksgroup.com. So if you'd like more information on that lead generation prospecting workshop next week, let us know at webinar@thebrooksgroup.com. We will be recording today's session, and it will be sent out to participants after our session today. You can also access this webinar as well as our previous ones on our website. We have a dedicated landing page. That's brooksgroup.com. If you go to the resources tab and then look for the virtual happy half hour webinar. And all of the data that we bring you in this webinar today is based on survey responses, and we'll be sending out a new survey next week. So we hope you'll take a look out for that and complete that, because that certainly does help us in terms of putting this content together. If you have any technical issues, please reach out to producer Rich. He is here to assist you today. And our webinar is brought to you by the Brooks Sales Leadership Forum. Russ, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, be glad to. First of all, let me just say to all the sales leaders out there, congratulations on closing April. Probably never in your careers, never at least in my career, had I ever seen a month where it was probably harder for most of you to get the business in that you brought in. And I know that sales leaders work hard all month long, but especially towards the end when they close it. So congratulations. Thanks for joining us here on the 1st of May. And I know you're already working on what's May going to look like. Our sponsor today is, as always, the Brooks Sales Leadership Forums. The forums are small groups that meet for an hour each week to take on the topics in real time that you as sales leaders are dealing with. A couple of topics we talked about this week in the forums: adjusting KPIs. How do you put together KPIs that keep your sales teams productive when right now they can't necessarily be out in front of customers, or even in some cases finding a lot of new business? So that was one. The other one was how is the fact that some states are starting to open up going to affect the way you run operations? Everything from what do I do if the people that are working from home now want to keep working from home and they're productive? What do I do if my people can't get childcare so they can't come back into the office? All real topics that we are dealing with in this time pandemic. So we'll stay tuned. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as maybe a topic for next week. Meanwhile, today, as Michelle has already said, our topics are really how do you generate leads in a world where things have changed so radically? And one of the data points I pulled this week from some information, the Gartner Group, a well-known research company, says that 75% of organizations are reporting that their leads are down. And about 70% of the reports are that buyers are just not booking new meetings right now. So as Michelle said, this is really a challenging time, and we hope to be able to provide you with some valuable information over the next half hour on how we can keep new leads flowing. But as we do always, we want to share some of the latest updates in terms of key data we've been looking at. So Michelle, why don't you take us to the survey?
Absolutely. Thank you, Russ. And impact on sales results. So we've been tracking this data for about 7 weeks now. And what we're showing you is kind of that beginning, mid, and then current as of this week. So we're looking at the week ending March 20th. Midpoint would be week of April 10th, and then current week, obviously week ending May 1st. And really here, not much to say other than new week, same story. Organizations continue to be significantly behind plan. So we're now up to more than 60% of our organizations responding are significantly behind plan. Many of the organizations that I know I've spoken with are seeing as much as 50% to 2/3 of their pipelines drying up. Deals are being pushed out, they're put on hold, or they're just canceled altogether. And of course, as we've been seeing for the last several weeks, there are still some organizations that are running ahead of plan, just slightly. It's a small number, but they are there.
Michelle, can I just add to that?
Absolutely.
As startling as the 60% number, a little over 60% number is, it still means that nearly 40% of the companies that responded to the survey are either just slightly behind plan or maybe a little bit ahead. So I think sometimes we have a tendency to throw just sort of like everything has stopped, when in the reality is there's some segments in our business that probably are still holding up okay. And that's kind of where we want to send our focus as we start to think about lead gen in a minute.
Absolutely, Russ. Thanks for that, because I think it does speak to your lead generation strategy moving forward and where do you focus the most attention for the best results. So absolutely a good point. We've also been hearing quite a bit about ability to collect. So this week, instead of showing you the length of time that the business impact is going to last, we wanted to show you some data that we've been tracking since the beginning of April, which is what companies are doing to ensure ability to collect from clients. And this is something anecdotally, I know I'm hearing, Russ, I think you're hearing about it as well from organizations. It comes up in questions on the webinars through our leadership forums, that ability to collect is certainly an issue. Despite that being an ongoing issue, close to 50% of organizations aren't doing anything different, and that number is increasing. So they're really not changing up their strategies at all.
We're finding this, especially coming out of the forums, conversations internally about either a customer trying to extend terms or really watching credit limits closely. So that's, I think, something that's going to continue to evolve through this time. Exactly.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think we're actually seeing two opposite strategies. So we have organizations that, as you said, are saying, we're really tightening up the terms and we're getting a lot, we're watching those payments much more closely. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we also have organizations reporting that they're trying to be more flexible and extend payment terms in the spirit of some money's better than no money, or get creative in terms of trades. So kind of two very different strategies. And I think that really depends on the organizations and where they are in their philosophy relative to collections and cash flow. We are having fewer organizations asking for deposits. And we have more organizations that are having their financial services people connect directly with customers to discuss credit and payments. And I think that speaks Russ, to what you were just saying in terms of, are you taking a really tight approach versus a lenient one?
And I think if you put that with the one next to it, it says about 50% of the organizations are having a special touch on their customers, either from sales or from finance, around ability to pay and confirming payment. So.
Exactly. So another question that we have been continuing to monitor, which is greatest challenge sales teams are experiencing right now. And again, I think this feeds right into our topic today: lead generation, accessing customers, being able to get face to face, whether that's literally or virtually, just being able to access folks. A lot of you are talking about stalled deals, managing that buyer hesitation, frozen budgets, and maintaining optimism, particularly in terms of uncertainty where organizations are dealing with furloughs and layoffs, and their customers are as well. So trying to balance the business needs with really the capacity to do business. And then we were also asking, again, as we segue into the lead generation topic, what, if anything, have organizations done to change their approach to lead sources, making them more effective in the world of virtual selling? And generally speaking, 63% of our respondents have seen a decrease in lead flow. And as Russ mentioned earlier, that does mean that there are still organizations that are seeing an increase in lead flow, or at least keeping it relatively stable. The top sources of new leads right now: email marketing, cold calling, and referrals. Those were the top three, all within 40 to 48% of the organizations using those lead sources. 45% of organizations say their opportunity sizes are roughly the same as prior to the quarantine and coronavirus. 48% say the opportunities are actually getting a little bit smaller. Adjustments that organizations have made. So what are you doing to make these lead sources more effective in the current environment? A lot of you are saying taking that empathy approach, really working with your messaging to maintain a connection to customers, maybe a softer call to action, and also really trying to tie your offering into a critical business need of the moment. So really tying it into what's most important to the customer at this time relative to, say, what was most important 2 months ago. Many of you are moving investments from, say, email marketing, focusing specifically on LinkedIn campaigns. So really trying to gauge where you get the most return on your marketing investment, and making virtual connections, more webinars, more training of clients, and just more connecting over the computer, much like we're doing right now, and Zoom meetings and that sort of thing. And Russ, a word from our sponsor.
Again, our webinar is sponsored by the Sales Leaders Forum. Forum at thebrooksgroup.com is the way you can get more information or to join. We have been growing these pretty much every week. There's a group or two that are being added. If you want a chance to talk to your peers and ask them what they're doing, one of the topics that we that I mentioned a couple earlier, but one that was talked about this week was, how will our sales teams say that they have been led after this, and how's that going to retention? How does it impact the overall what we want to try and accomplish? Those are the kinds of questions or operationals around KPI. We invite you to join the forum. It's free. It's really geared towards how do we get conversation going around what we face. And then I also want to mention, as Michelle mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of material to cover in the next 15 minutes. I want to be able to let you know that we are doing a virtual workshop on Thursday, 3 o'clock Eastern. Going to be 90 minutes long. If you email us at webinar Brooks Group, the charge for the workshop is $149. One of our facilitators likes to say there's a difference between knowing and doing. And the workshop is all about how do you take the ideas, even some of which we're going to talk here, plus a number more, and put them into work in your organization so that you can benefit them. So you can those from webinar or for more information, go to webinar@thebrooksgroup.com. Send an email there and we'll get there. The top 3 resources, we had a question came in for cold calling right now, were emails, phone calls, and referrals. Those were the 3 top. So let's move into what hasn't changed with the idea of lead generation. What hasn't changed is the fundamentals. You start by making sure you're really targeting the right market segments. As we said earlier, about 40% of companies either are on plan or slightly behind plan. Their businesses have gotten through the initial shock of the crisis. They're seeing their customers continue to order. And so what's important here is to focus. There is at least an urban legend that Willie Sutton, the bank robber, one time was asked why he robbed banks. And he said, because that's where the money is. And what we're encouraging you to do, if you're going to be focusing on lead generation, go to the customers that still have or are starting to loosen up and have some ability to buy. That's going to be the most fruitful ground. Second of all, the fundamental of you've got to make a good first impression. We're going to dig a little deeper into this in the next slide, but you want to make sure if you've been through Brooks training, you have a real solid statement of intention, that you are making clear what the call is about. There is a strong value-oriented proposition towards buyer, towards the seller. In more and more cases are saying you need to collaborate. It's no longer one-way communication, but it's about how together you can help them solve a key issue or problem that they're finding. And you want to make sure that there are very clear calls to action. Now, I've seen it kind of in both directions here. You don't want it to be a hard call to action, as in push hard for some kind of a commitment, but you want to make sure it's clear what you believe the next steps are. So whether that's a call, whether it's to engage in a video conference, something so that they know what to do. If you're doing email, you want to maybe give them the ability to call, to respond via email, or click through to get additional information. And then finally, the last one is to remain active. What we have seen through the wave of the last 6 weeks, let's say, is different lead sources are performing differently. A lot of people, as Michelle said, have moved to email and to content marketing, doing webinars and white papers and such. And right now, we're starting to hear from our people, our sales leaders, that there's a little bit of fatigue around email, that we're all getting buried with email, we're all getting buried with offers to go do something. And it seems to me that, from what I can gather, it's having a better response for customers of yours who you already have a relationship than it is when you're trying to establish that new prospect. But the thing to do is continue to measure. If you've got outbound campaigns, see what's working, what's not working, and be ready to adjust or switch on the fly, because what's working today may not be working in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And as we start to open up and begin to have some face-to-face meetings, even if it's at social distance, that's going to bring a whole different perspective. Some of the folks are talking about they're using what limited time they can get out on the road and go visit people to have a way to prospect and get into new organizations. I mentioned it's really important to have a good first impression, and I just want to talk through that a little bit. Every time you call, there's this question of, who are you? Why should I give you, even a minute of my time to listen? And then, what's your request? What do you really want of me? And so we teach at Brooks the idea of what we call a mini imp. And if you know our process, it's the beginning part of the process. But it's a very clear value statement. It's the reason your organization exists, the value that you can offer the prospect, and the reason you want to say yes. So a good opening statement is something like, hi, my name is Tom Jones from Acme, and for over 40 years, we've helped small distribution companies reduce their time to shipment while increasing shipment accuracy. So I put a value statement in the beginning of that the person now knows, hey, there's something potentially in this. I've done it for a while. I've done it for 40 years. And then I'd follow up with, I'd like to talk to you to learn more about your company and see if we can bring those same benefits to you. Now I've presented a clear idea of who I am, what value I bring, and set my request for a meeting. It could also be something like, hi, I'm Bob Smith with Fund. I assist my clients to grow their sales funnels through improved prospecting. Do you have a few minutes now to see if I could help you? The idea of being able to say to see if and to add that in the sentence allows the conversation to now take place. If I call up and say, I'd like to have a few minutes of your time so I can tell you how I can solve your problem is very off-putting. It causes the person the buyer in this case, to think, how dare you so arrogant as to think you understand my business, my problems, everything else. But instead to ask, you can learn, you can then figure out what it is that their needs are and shape what it is that you offer, really to focus in on that key issue. And right now what we're hearing is the key issues of customers are the things that you need to address. So what's a couple of specific lead generation tactics that you might be able to do? I've broken this down into outbound leads and inbound leads. For sales teams, outbounds, referrals remain your best lead sources. It is many, many, many more times easier to both get an appointment with somebody where there's a referral and to be able to ultimately convert that to a sale. So now is the time to be asking current customers. The last statistic I saw said that most customers were willing to give up to 5 referrals, but that only something like 11% of salespeople asked for a referral. Use your LinkedIn networks, both your connections and other people's in your organization. If you have people who have maybe support personnel who have worked with customers or customer service from previous jobs, they may know people that you need. So look and have conversations about how together you can reach out and can make contacts. You can look at, again, this is all part of the free LinkedIn service. Look at what prospects your coworkers have and see if there's any you're trying to reach, and then ask them to craft a message for them to forward on. And then we're seeing some opportunities around BYOX, bring your own coffee, bring your own lunch, bring your own beverage. I just saw one before we started the webinar that was sponsor a local coffee hour for grocery workers. And in this case, they'd gotten a couple of their customers together in the local area. They were non-competitive, and they're buying coffee for the grocery workers at a particular shopping center. And it's a chance for you as the salesperson to engage your customers in doing good, generate some goodwill, invite them to come out. And as you're standing there as people get the coffee and whatever else, in again, a safe social distancing way, you've got an opportunity to talk to those prospects. Another one is, prospecting is just flat out hard work, and there's no real tricks. Michelle said earlier, phone calls are still the most valuable way or the most productive way to be able to get leads. And so I encourage you to continue to do that. Somebody on here talked about, setting up a time for sort of like outbound calls. I call that hackathons. It's what they do in technology. They'll together for 48 hours and create a new product. In this case, you grab 4 hours and you just tell your team, we're going to go generate leads right now. Let's go, let's push, let's make this happen. Old lead lists. If you have old trade show events or things that maybe weren't worth following up on when you were out and about, talk to your marketing team, talk to whoever keeps those lists and dig deeper. Maybe if you're using salesforce.com, go back and look at the prospect list before you converted them to opportunities and see what might be there and work them. Yes, it may have been a while since you talked to them, but now they may be more interested in what it is that you're working with. And if you're trying to get an offer in front of someone, overnight delivery envelopes still get delivered. Even if they're not working at home, if there's somebody in the office, they're going to make sure that it gets routed to you in some way. So depending again on your product and who you're trying to reach, you can use them to be able to deliver a message there. What's really important in all of these is to personalize, to be able to offer creative solutions. If you're going to ask for a meeting, make it clear that you want to do it in a socially distanced, safe way. Maybe you'll meet them in the lobby or meet them someplace where you can be outside. You want to show both, as Michelle said earlier, the importance of having human empathy, caring for them, and yet also knowing that they need to continue their business, as do you. And then finally, on inbound calls, I want to cover this. And then, by the way, we have the Q&A open if you want to ask questions. I see we've got a couple that have stacked up here. We'll answer those in a minute, but feel free to go ahead and post your questions. Number one, if you can surprise your prospects, the better. I've seen some people capitalizing on canceled trade shows or conferences. They'll send out some photos of that particular area. They'll maybe do a reminisce about hey, remember last year we had that great dinner here, or we took in the game, or we took in the theater, something that builds that connection. Looking forward to maybe having dinner at X location again next year. But just give them something beyond that regular, like, hey, let's get together and talk. Podcasts are another one that is really interesting. One of the questions was around what about audio messages versus email messages? I think that fits into this area. I think you should both experiment with audio as well as video. There are a couple of tools, and producer Rich, maybe you'd put these names in the chat for everyone. Soapbox is a short video tool that we will sometimes use, where you can record a video and then send it out to people. And CoVideo is another one where you can record a video message, put it into the email, and be able to distribute those. There are free versions and some pay versions of both of those, but go ahead and experiment with what feature and capabilities you need. What I like about the videos, if you keep them short and you keep them focused, and short usually means less than 2 minutes, maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes. They're unique. People are opening them. People will watch them as long as they know they're safe. And then last of all, lead magnets continue to work in this environment. What do I mean by lead magnets? That's not something you put on your refrigerator. A lead magnet is something that causes people to want to be able to connect. So things like checklists in your industry, or cheat sheets to be able to use equipment, or a common setup. Micro surveys, micro meaning 5 questions at max, make it a 1-minute response kind of thing. We were laughing internally that we've gotten some surveys that were supposed to be short, and you got into them and they just seem to take forever. And so the bailout rate comes high. So keep them short. As well as if I were running a group right now, I would be asking my marketing team to go find somebody who can get me branded face masks or branded hand sanitizer. All the things that we're going to need as we open this up, people are looking for right now. Some folks that we've talked to in the Sales Leadership Forum are looking for it for their team. And they are, it's an opportunity for you to be able to deliver something that sticks around and that people are going to think of your company. Yes, CoVideo was the name of the company that we talked about. The last thing that we'll talk about here in a big way is, again, inbound marketing. It's the hard work. You've got to tighten up your messages. The things that appealed to people 3 weeks ago, or 2 months ago, don't appeal to them anymore. So you need to really be focused on what the key concerns are of people. And by the way, I want to just take a minute. Some research from Cascade Insights said that since this whole thing has started, about less than 40% of marketing people are reporting that they are working significantly harder than they were before. And I just want to do a shout out to Tracy Bauman, who is in of all our direct marketing and lead generation, and her team. They are really working hard to make sure to make sure we're communicating in the right way with you. And so I just wanted to say thanks to Tracy. And if you've got somebody in your organization is working hard, please say thank you to them as well. Think about the places that people come. Now's a good time to review the landing pages on your website. Think about the content that you're producing. Blogs and content marketing, very important as it relates to people are still reading if it's directly focused on what their pain points are. Otherwise, they're not reading as much because they're still overwhelmed with working from home, dealing with children, dealing with family members who may be sick, dealing with pets. And then make sure email with a twist. We talked about video messages, all really good. Again, just one note, email fatigue is a real issue. So I would encourage you to look at what your corporation is doing. Make sure that every email they send is significant. Measure your open rates to see that they are still being read and still being attached and worked to. And try not to overwhelm your clients or your prospects, because right now speaking too much is turning people off more than speaking just the right amount. So those are the ideas that we came up with. I know there's a lot there. I just, again, want to say, if you'd like to know more, we've got this 90-minute workshop on Thursday where we're going to dig into not only these, but some additional ideas and move it from the idea of here's a bunch of ideas to here's how you put it to work in your organization. And you can email webinar@thebrooksgroup.com and we'll send you information on that webinar. Limited spaces available. So if you're thinking about it, go ahead and get some information and get on that list now. With that, let's open it up for questions. Michelle, what would you, as our audience, like to know about concerning lead generation at this time?
While we're waiting for questions to come in, one thing I wanted to circle back on, Russ, that you mentioned was agility, and really measuring what's working and pivoting, and the market is moving so fast. I know organizations that I'm talking to have found strategies and they'll work really well for a couple of weeks, and then they find they have to mix it up again, and again that works for a couple of weeks, and then they've got to try something. They'll try something different. So bearing in mind that, you know, over the duration of this environment, you're certainly going to need to test and evaluate and probably change things up on a regular basis.
I've seen the same thing. I've seen people work with with Twitter to be able to promote products that have a need right now, which they've dropped back from pretty much everything else. So I know of one company in the lighting business, all they're promoting are their UV oriented products right now. So we got a great question. How do you know how much is too much regarding emails, and how often would you suggest? So I think we need to break emails into two categories. There is the bulk email that is sent out from a centralized source in your organization. And the tools that go with that are very well, have been very well designed to tell you what are your open rates, what are your click-through rates, and monitor those closely. And as you start to see those drop off, you've probably hit the saturation point, or if you're not getting the same open rates as you have before. I believe that individual emails where I, as an individual salesperson, are emailing to a customer, we haven't seen quite the same level of drop off there. But again, practice the good email policies. Make sure you've got a very clear subject line. Keep the email focused and to the point. Make sure it's very clear what it is you're asking of the person. So maybe at these times, it's almost better to go with having your sales team send prospecting leads one-on-one as opposed to broader blasts. So for those of you who are familiar with a company called the Blue Ocean Strategy, one of the questions that came in is, you know, how do you find a new blue ocean? How do you find something that nobody is not being affected by? I think you've got to do some research. I believe the person who asked the question is in Spain, but in the US last week, we just announced gross domestic product numbers. They talked about what industries were doing well, which ones weren't. I would have a conversation about who's ever handling inbound leads, whether it's a customer service group or a marketing team, a sales team. What are the industries, just your next sales meeting, what are the industries that are calling us and that look like they have real money to spend? Those are the kind of folks you'd be investing in. Other blue ocean pieces, I think, are trying to figure out where to, what are markets that you've wanted to pursue but maybe haven't, and ask yourself the question, how are they affected? It's going to take some research to understand just in the last, and again, I think it's limited to the last couple of weeks because things are starting to open up. Who's buying, who's not? Another question that came in is what's better today, an email message or a LinkedIn message? Boy, I think a LinkedIn message where you're trying to make the connection just to sell is of limited value. I know personally that I really watch and probably reject most of those. I think a LinkedIn message to somebody I've worked with in the past is something that's beneficial and is being read because there's a relationship there. I think, again, we talked last week about LinkedIn groups and how you can listen to what's happening there. Now might be a good time to think about participating in terms of some of the things that you're hearing, help yourself look a little more like a thought leader so that they may be turning to you. And usually in LinkedIn groups, don't go for hard sales, but to the degree you've built some credibility, so not your first post, but after a week or so, if you have something your company's doing and you just mention it as an example, that's really good. People are looking for what is working and what are their peers doing. And if you can provide that kind of information in LinkedIn, I think it works well.
And I think a
SOI
personal connection too, Russ. I was just going to say, if you mentioned earlier having salespeople reach out personally by email. I think even by LinkedIn, if you can craft that message specific to who you're reaching out to, that makes me want to accept
absolutely,
as opposed to a blanket message.
Personalized. So SOI, there's a question that came in. That means statement of intention. And it's a Brooks Group term that we use when we teach people how to start a meeting or a phone call, so that what they're saying is important to the person in the meeting. So for example, a non-prospect oriented statement of intention is for me to walk in and say, I have a new product that I'd like to tell you about. All about me as the seller. What I'm looking for is, can it be about you as the buyer? So I want to turn that around to something that's more oriented towards them. Like I talked about, we help small distribution companies, if that's who I'm calling on, achieve some real value. Or we help companies grow their sales funnels. Either of those makes it very clear in that early conversation that I have something of value, and therefore you should exchange, Mr. Buyer, your time with me because I'm going to make that worthwhile for you. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Well, looks like it's it.
All right. Again, remember the sales leadership forums, which you can get more information on at forum@thebrooksgroup.com, and our virtual workshop on lead generation, where these ideas and more, we move into a 90-minute workshop. That's going to be Thursday, coming Thursday, 3:00 Eastern time, Eastern US time. Email webinar@thebrooksgroup.com and we will get you more information.
And thank you all very much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next week for the next virtual Happy Half Hour next Friday.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.